All right, good morning, BD. I hope everyone is doing well. I wanted to touch base with you a little bit before you get into the movie. One of the things that you'll be watching has to do with kind of social media, and a natural question could be what connection this has with criminal litigation. And it has a big connection to the one of the issues we talked about in the very first day, which is this notion that people have to believe in the system, right? People have to understand how the system works and have to believe in the system. If they don't, the system doesn't work. And social media is part of that in the sense that the social media atmosphere is part of the public information universe, so to speak. And so if some small or large percentage of individuals are gaining some portion of their information through social media, then it's a concern for us who may be interested in not only the fairness and equity of our criminal justice system, but the fairness and equity of our society writ large. And so it's important for us to understand what the importance is of social media. So I'm talking here in regard to a Pew Research paper or an article in regard to news use across social media platforms in 2020 that I wanted to bring to your attention before you guys watch the movie. To understand kind of how pervasive the use of social media is to gain one's news, either partially or fully. And that's important to understand because if a lot of news model descriptions sort of rely on a slightly older model of how people get their information. But use across social media shows a pretty fast growing trend that suggests that a lot of people, and not just in your demographic, by the way, not just in the 18 to 25 demographic, which people traditionally think of as the one that's most comfortable with social media and the most often using it, but also the next demographic, as we'll see. So the 26 to 39 actually uses it quite a bit. So it would be one thing if the social media source of information was used to as a corollary to written news or written newspapers or even television newspapers. But if it becomes the primary source of information, it's a big concern for us to determine what the impact of it is. Okay, so this is the article I wanted to talk about. Facebook stands as the regular source of news for about a third of Americans. In particular, I want to take a look at some of the information here. So about half of Americans, according to the Pew Research Center, get news on social media at least sometimes. So the percentage of adults who get news from social media often or sometimes is maybe the one you want to look at, because that adds up to 53%, which, by the way, as we'll talk about, one of the things that you need to pay attention to when you look at these sorts of charts and tables and graphs is make sure everything adds up to 100. On occasion, either because of mistakes or because of situations where it's a misinformation news site or a phony news site or a fake news site. Sometimes I've seen several pie charts that actually don't add up to 100%, which is sort of interesting. So a very small percentage of people don't get any digital news, and then never. So it ends up being about a third, and then rarely, sometimes, and often. So the one of the things to note, of course, is and one of the things that makes this, as we'll see, somewhat more reliable is they give you some information in regard to how the polling works, and there's actually an appendix in terms of what the questions that were asked and so forth, and all those are extremely important to understand what weight and credibility you should give this conclusion. All right, so what's the largest source of news as far as social media? So the big one seems to be Facebook. Okay, so the percentage of adults who use Facebook use the site versus regularly get news on the site. It's about 36%, which is sort of not exactly a Venn diagram, but sort of a quasi-Venn diagram. About a fifth of those who use it get it through YouTube. All right, so of the people who are YouTube users, 23% of them get their news regularly from YouTube. Twitter, Instagram, smaller percentage Reddit, Snapchat, LinkedIn, TikTok, WhatsApp, and so forth. I will mention TikTok is one of the places where some of the more traditional news outlets have been trying to make an inroads, and certainly a number of news personalities and podcasters have also been trying to make inroads into TikTok and use it as a platform. All right, So among 11 social media sites, Facebook sits at the top with about a third getting news there regularly. YouTube comes next. 23% of US adults regularly getting news there, and Twitter serving as a regular news source for 50% of all adults. So this is really important to understand, because if some percentage of Americans, at least a third it looks like, at least a third of those in the sample space who responded to the poll are getting their news, some percentage of their news from social media, then how social media transmits information, how accurate it is, and to what extent does it dovetail with some of our cognitive vulnerabilities that we've already talked about in the last few weeks. If social media tends to exacerbate or amplify some of the instincts we already have in regard to tribal behavior and in terms of how we interact with information and so forth, then that's something that's very, very important to know. So I wanted to go over this with you. The Twitter users regularly get news on the site. Actually, that seems to be the largest in terms of who regularly get news there, 59% in Twitter, which is extremely problematic because Twitter's information transmission system is very problematic, as we'll see, in terms of accuracy and a variety of other concerns that are pretty important. Facebook still with a pretty large proportion who regularly get news there. Okay, and of course Reddit. All right, so fewer Americans report using them all. So the questions were they're worded in a little bit of a strange way, in the sense that if you were someone who used all of these social media sites and then got your news through sort of a combination, sort of a buffet style, those responses tend to have a lower impact on the overall numbers. So who are the regular social media consumers? And this I thought would be interesting for us to talk about, because in terms of the age group. So the larger age group, surprisingly enough, is not the 18 to 29, which is what most people traditionally think of as the kind of the social media crowd. At least not for all of them. Facebook, it's 30 to 49, which is interesting, and YouTube as well. They're about even for Twitter, and then Instagram favors the 18 to 29, about even for Reddit. LinkedIn favors 30 to 49. Probably not too many surprises here, but I think the Facebook and the YouTube actually were a little surprising to me. To what extent the 30 to 49 crowd accounted for it. What's the kind of cross-section based on education? The more college they had, right, this sort of determines how likely they were to use these social media sites. So Twitter has a pretty high following among those who are college educated or better. Also, a lot of media personalities and journalists use Twitter. So Instagram, some college but not all, perhaps people in college may account for some of this, given the proportions up here. One would guess that they're reflected in here as well. Reddit, some college and education. And then, of course, LinkedIn has the majority of people who are college education, bachelor's degree and up. Vast majority. Not a huge amount of surprise there. Instagram has more Hispanic representation according to the poll numbers. Okay. Most social media is Republican minority, slightly. Facebook's closest to even, followed by YouTube, Twitter, and so forth. My guess is Parler, and I guess Truth Social is the other one. Probably these numbers are close to reverse, would be my guess. Okay. So 3 in 10 say it helps them understand current events, but there's an understanding to that, at least among the people who were polled, they were asked, how accurate do you think the news is on social media? And so there was at least some recognition that it was largely inaccurate, which is actually larger than it has been in the past, which is actually good news, as we'll see. It's good for people to sort of understand and temper their use of social media with the understanding of its limitations as an accurate source of information. So social media in and of itself, although it has some other problematic aspects in terms of long-term use, and as you'll see in the movie, in terms of a way to transmit news, and given the number of people who actually use it to transmit news and some of the problematic aspects of it, it really is something we need to pay attention to going forward. If this number continues to grow, people that start to realize that social media really isn't a good place to get information, then that might be a good trend. And then social media may go back to more of what the original model may have been, to some extent, as opposed to a model of actually being a source of public information. Given that none of the corporations that own social media have any loyalty towards or are even members of any sort of governing agency. So they're private actors, and their primary motivation is profit, as you'll see. The movie goes into some depth in terms of how the profit model works. Okay. So minorities say news and social media improve their understanding of current events. So that's a minority versus making them more confused. This is helping them understand current events has gone down in general. And again, I think people's understanding of the limitations of social media as a way to transmit information, as well as the overall extent to which increases comprehension has gone down. That's been a good trend going forward. So that's a good thing. Anyway, I just wanted to go over some of those trends with you to get you a feel for kind of what the scope of the problem is before you guys watch the movie. It is a long movie, but it's definitely worth sitting for the whole thing. Do me a favor and don't have your laptops open and your phones out. Really give it your attention, because it is your generation. You know, as I'm fond of saying, we want your generation obviously to solve problems that matter. This is a problem, and although there are some steps in the right direction, some trends that are hopeful, it's still a problem that needs more of a solution than we have at the moment. So I wanted you guys to see some of that data before you watch the movie. I will see you guys after the movie. We'll have another quick interaction with me talking to you about a couple of other things going forward. And then hopefully I will see you guys the following week. So I hope you guys had a wonderful long weekend, and take care. Just know that I'm thinking of you, and hang in there. On the week of the 15th is when I start coming in full time. And so we'll get some more field trips and some more activities to hopefully at least partially make up for some of the last few weeks that have been so disruptive for you. All right. So take care, and I'm thinking of you. Hang in there.